What is the most horrific thing you witnessed as a child? Went by my friend's house one Saturday morning 'cause she hadn't shown up for art class. Got to her house and there's cops everywhere freaking out. 10-year-old me wandered up to the front door, a long time ago, before SOCOs existed, and saw a massive pool of blood and brain matter on the doorstep. Turns out her dad had been murdered, shot, at close range, in the head, during the night over a poker game or something. It was awful and I didn't know what to do or say. When I told my parents about it later that day, they also didn't know how to handle my feelings. I got a hug and we all moved on. It was truly bizarre. Siberian Husky got out of his enclosure because someone didn't close the fucking gate. He immediately attacked my cat, viciously and too quickly for me to respond. I ran after him and tackled him. Cat died screaming in my arms. I think I was 9 or maybe 10. I'm 30 and I still think about it. Don't think I've ever cried so hard. Dude. Very similar thing happened to me. I got my cat, Nikita, from a vet shop one day walking to kindergarten with my mom when I was 5, and it was as expected a great pet. We grew very close. And then 3 years later, in child time a lifetime, we moved to a new house. There were a couple of construction workers that would walk by with a dog and the dog would always scramble for my cat. This one day, they let the dog go, and he got my cat. Long story short, she also died in front of me, and I cried the whole day. Lady who lived across the road reversing over her 8-month-old baby when she was drunk. My grandmother ran over her 4-year-old son and killed him, the youngest of 5, long before I was born, and it destroyed her for the rest of her life. She wasn't careless or inebriated, but he decided come out to play hide and seek behind the tires after she'd already checked and gotten into the vehicle. I never knew why she was the way she was until I had my own kids, and now it's such an ingrained fear of mine that my routine is to check around the car, start the car, get out and check around the car again, and then leave. There was an episode of Oprah years ago profiling people who accidentally killed a family member. There was a grandma, fully sober, dropping off her grandkids at her daughter's and she accidentally backed her van over her 3-year-old grandson who had run around the car. The grandson was killed. They had the grandma and the parents on the show. The parents were pleading with her that they forgave her and that it wasn't her fault. The grandma couldn't accept it. Oprah was trying to ask her why she doesn't just forgive herself. The grandma started crying and said over and over, "I can't. I just can't. I can't." The poor grandma crying has been burned into my mind ever since. I can't imagine what that would be like, and to be honest, I would probably react the same way if I experienced something similar. 5-year-old me had a best friend that was 6 months older than me and lived next door. Brad and I were tight, like only innocent 5-year-olds that haven't been tainted by the world can be. I used to watch Brad get on the bus to kindergarten every morning and wish that I could go with him. Kindergarten and riding that big yellow bus full of other kids seemed like so much fun. My older sister got to go on the bus to 1st grade and she loved school, so I assumed it was fun. Every morning I would watch from our living room window as they'd gather at the bus stop at the end of our driveway. One morning Brad walked about 30 feet up from where the bus normally stops. As the bus pulls up and begins to slow down, he leaned out from the curb and placed his hands on the still moving bus, acting as if he was a superhero and stopping the bus with his hands. I watched him lose his footing and fall directly under the rear tires of the bus. I remember seeing the kids seated in the back of the bus bounce in the seats as the rear tires bounced over Brad's chest. I also remember very clearly his legs raising up quickly as the tires hit his chest. I yelled for my mom, who promptly called 911, told me to stay in the house as she ran down. Obviously Brad died. I didn't go to a funeral or see his parents after that. Nothing. It was like all at once, none of that existed anymore and we never spoke of it. I was 5 and in the bathtub alone. I thought it'd be funny to use this little squirt toy I had to surprise my mom and stepdad by running into their room and squirting them with it. As I got out of the tub and crept towards their room, naked and wet mind you, I heard what sounded like my mom in pain. So I burst through the door ready to attack whoever was hurting my mom with this water toy, only to see my mom flat on her back, stepdad on his knees between her legs going at it. I squirted him with the little toy, but with him and my mom both junkie alcoholics who couldn't be bothered to stop at the mere presence of a 5-year-old, my stepdad said. And these words still haunt me to this day, "Wanna ride?" He then flipped my mom on all fours, grabbed my arm, put me on my mom's back as if she was giving me a pony ride, and carried on as if I weren't even there. My mom has since cleaned up and made amends as best she could. I've sought help as an adult and am doing as best as can be expected, as this is just one of a number of horrific sexual abuses I endured as the child of a sex addict junkie. In about 1986 or 87 I saw a kid get his head run over by a city bus. A bunch of us were skateboarding in a park. This kid and a few others wanted to go to a skate shop about a block away, so we all packed up and started skating to the shop. This kid's skateboard hit a crack in the sidewalk. He fell and his skateboard flew under the bus. He crawled under the bus to get his board. Meanwhile, a few of us were half a block behind yelling and screaming at him to not do it and trying to get the attention of the bus driver. As this kid sticks his head out to crawl out, the bus takes off, crushing his head. The bus driver had no clue. We yell for someone to call 911. I can remember him whimpering and I knew he was really bad off. The ambulance shows up and immediately scoops him up and rushes him to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The bus driver was about 10 miles into his trip before police stopped him. Turns out he was a family friend of one of our skateboarding crew. He had no idea what had happened. The driver was pretty messed up after though. The kid was about 15 or 16 when he passed. I will never forget that day. When we still lived in the West Indies in the 80s, my older brother, he was 8, I was 5, went up on the metal roof to put a basket of our mom's hair curlers out to dry in the sun. He jumped down, but a sharp, broken piece of metal caught him just under his armpit and ripped the flesh down to his elbow. I was so young, so I don't remember much after that, but there was a huge gash, deep. I remember him standing in the outside stone shower, blood and water pouring down the drain, and there was blood everywhere. And I do mean everywhere outside. I get flashes of memory that look like a crime scene. He still has a thick long scar down his arm, with like 8 thin scars going down the length of it, so it kind of looks like a centipede. My mother burying me, 3, my younger brother, 8 months, and herself in sand, to kill herself and take us with her, comes in a close second. I'm sorry, burying you? We're gonna need a follow-up on that, please. It's a very long and fucked up story. I put the TL, doctor, in bold for you. My grandfather's parents are also his aunt and uncle. His father raped his mother when she was a teen and she gave birth to a daughter. They both continued to live with their parents, and she was forced to raise her daughter like it was a normal situation. He later raped her again, and she got pregnant with my grandfather. Once again, the family acted like nothing was wrong. Years later, he met my grandmother, who already had a daughter by another man. He eventually began raping her. When my grandmother found out, she sent her to live with extended family members. She assumed that he raped her because she wasn't his blood daughter. Some of the family has since excused this by saying that she had 4 kids at that point and wouldn't have been able to support them if she had divorced him. As if that made it okay to send away your abused daughter but keep the rapist. After the oldest daughter was gone, my grandfather started to take my 12-year-old mother from her bed in the middle of the night to rape her while everyone else slept. He did the same to some of her other sisters. They kept the secret for decades because of how much they feared him. My mother was so afraid that she would become pregnant with her own sibling that her boyfriend helped her to become pregnant. I talked to him about it years later and he said that they came up with the plan because he didn't know how else to help her and he only regrets not being able to do more. They couldn't go to the police. It was the 1970s in the West Indies and everyone knew everyone on the small island. Some of the officers were friends with her father. Even if they weren't, it's doubtful that they would have done anything. She ended up in a string of bad relationships as she tried to keep away from her father. He had forced her to name her first child after him, and since it was a boy, he wanted to raise him since he only had one son. My mother, for obvious reasons, didn't want her son to be influenced by him. By 1983 it was my older brother, me and my little brother, and my mother was in the worst relationship she would ever have. Her boyfriend beat her constantly. It got bad enough that my mother sent my older brother to live temporarily on another island with his father because the abuser was starting to look his way and she wanted to protect him. She showed up beaten and bloody one night asking her father for help, but he said her boyfriend was within his rights to discipline her. She couldn't see a way out and decided to take her own life. My brother was being cared for and protected by his father, but she feared what would happen to me and my younger brother if she wasn't here to protect us. So she felt that she had to save us by taking us with her. She took us to the beach that night. She buried my brother in the sand, she buried me in the sand, and then she buried herself. Since I was an energy-filled toddler, I dug my way out and walked back to the village. I don't remember a lot besides getting buried in sand. My family later told me that I knocked on the nearest family member's door, told them what happened and walked them back to the beach. They had to rush my brother to the hospital because he had stopped breathing, but he was saved. My mother had a complete mental breakdown. Even though she's doing well with her bipolar disorder right now, my siblings and I still tried to keep in contact with her as much as possible. Since we all moved out and it's just her and her husband now. Because that was not her only suicide attempt over the years. The most horrific things I witnessed as a teen is my younger sister waking me up as she sobbed. I go into her bathroom half asleep and our mother is on the floor unmoving and cold with an empty pill bottle next to her. I hate that man. I will never forgive my grandfather for the hell he put her and her siblings through. He ruined the lives of many of them as they are still dealing with the abuse. His abuse caused a lot of mental illness in his children. Some of it eventually bled through in the kids we thought were fine. It was the sound like some wounded animal coming from my basement, crying and moans, and did not sound human. When I investigated, it was my grandmother laying on the floor. I didn't know what was wrong, she wouldn't answer me. I tried to move her, stupid, but I was a kid, and she cried even worse. I called 911 and held her and she just sobbed and shook and moaned. It turned out she had pretty bad cancer and she fell and broke her hip and it like shattered and caused other injuries. I don't know if the cancer caused her to fall or they were unrelated or what honestly. But I do know they said the pain was so bad that she probably wasn't even aware that I was there. She didn't last a lot longer from there, I think 6 months or so. It made me sad for a long time. And still haunts me when I think about it. I'm thinking between me nearly knocking my brother's eye out and the neighbor setting himself on fire. When I was 3 and my brother was 6, I swung the wooden end of a broom at him on our backyard and hit him in the face. All I could see was him holding his eye and lots of blood seeping through his fingers. I was crying, he was not. I missed the eye about 2 cms. The neighbor set himself on fire when I was about 14. We were sitting out on the backyard with my parents when his wife came over, clearly in distress, looking for my dad to help because the man poured gasoline all over himself and was shouting and threatening to burn himself. He was an alcoholic and a gambling addict, and the slot machines weren't banned in pubs yet. So naturally, on payday, which comes once a month in my country, he played away both of their wages. My dad went over and there was probably a lot of struggle because their 6 to 7 year old daughter came out of the house in shock, so I took her hand and brought her inside our house. Both her older brothers, 19, 17, and mine, 17, were out somewhere. Eventually the man managed to lit himself on fire. Thankfully my dad wasn't hurt, but he survived thanks to my dad but could never go back to work. My parents split up when I was young. About when I was 5 or 6 years old. Mother got custody of us kids and all of the sudden my life became a living hell. She was a mentally ill, abusive psychotic. I have hundreds of stories of her abuse. This is just one of many. I can't recall my exact age when this happened. Maybe around 6 to 8 years old. My younger, over a year younger, sister and I were in the living room, watching TV. My sister was sitting on the floor and I was sitting on the couch. Out of the blue our mother walks into the room carrying 2 heaping plates of spinach. Nothing else. Just spinach. She lays the plates in front of us. Sister complained that she didn't want any spinach. That's all it took to trigger my mother's inner psychotic. At that, she pounced on sister. Grabbed a fistful of sister's hair at the back of her head, pulled her head back. And with the other hand started scooping up the spinach with her fingers and slamming the spinach into sister's mouth while screaming at the top of her lungs, "Eat it. Eat it. Eat it. I made it, now you're going to eat it." My poor sister. 1 minute she's watching TV, peacefully minding her own business. The next minute she's got this screaming, raving lunatic directly on top of her, physically assaulting her. Literally trying to shove spinach down her throat. That would have to be witnessing the deaths of part of a young family while on vacation in Skegness, England. It was 2004, so I was 9 years old at the time. I remember sitting in traffic, waiting to leave to head back home. We had a purple BMW 328i. All of a sudden, I see this double-decker bus plowing down the road, exceeding the speed limit, 30 miles per hour back then, but it was subsequently dropped to 20 miles per hour following this incident. The driver had a choice to collide with traffic to his right, our lane, traffic in front of him, or to mount the pavement and collide with pedestrians. Without going into too much detail, I know that a mother and at least 2 young children were killed in the incident. I saw it with my very own eyes, and that's something I will never unsee. I recall my mom and my stepdad at the time being questioned by the police as eyewitnesses. If I remember correctly, the driver blamed the incident on faulty brakes, but I believe he was subsequently found guilty of causing the incident himself by pressing the wrong pedal. Rest in peace to those lives that were lost on that tragic day. I still remember you. When I was 12, my mom lived in a shifty neighborhood, and we would visit her for the summer. One day, my neighbors, a woman and her boyfriend, got in a terrible fight. He ended up jumping in the car. She reached through a broken window, I'm not sure why, and he gunned the gas. The glass cut her wrist from her hand and almost up to her elbow. It was obvious he noticed, but he drove off anyway. There was blood everywhere, and her kids toddled out of the house crying. We came over with towels and water, and of course, we called 911. While we kept pressure on her wound with the towels, cleaning up, and tending to her children, she started to cry and beg that the police wouldn't come. We told her they were already on their way, which made her more upset. When they got there, she begged them to not pursue or arrest her boyfriend. The ambulance finally arrived and took care of her. I remember asking the cop if they were going to arrest her boyfriend and he said, "I'd love to, but we can't if she refuses to press charges." A few days later, we saw that the same boyfriend was back at their home like nothing ever happened, regardless of the line of several stitches in her arm. I lived on a long street that had many subdivisions on either side, I'd say at least 10. So we were pretty heavily populated. Kids all around, every street, every home. One morning, just as the sun was starting to come up, my buddies and myself were going to the bus stop to catch the school bus and something told us to go to our other friend's stop instead. Well, in between our stop and theirs was the only road that intersected ours, so it was the main route of travel. I'm walking by the retention pond and just happen to glance down and I see a man with his head partially blown off laying in a pool of his own blood with a double-barrel shotgun next to him. He chose that spot to shoot himself so everyone could see it. I am fully convinced of that. I don't think I've ever been that shaken before, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be again. That was the most morbid experience ever, and I was about 12. The saddest part though, it looked like he had a suicide note, but it was so saturated in his blood that it was indecipherable. Another crazy story was when my friend's grandmother decided to stop taking her psych meds and eventually ended up committing suicide right in front of him. She got in her son's truck that was in the driveway, put it in reverse, pedaled to the metal straight across the street into a neighboring home, destroying their garage. My buddy comes out, like WTF? And she points at him and screams, "This is your fault." Then she pulls a gun out and shoots herself in the temple. It was all over the news. It was insane. I didn't see the second one, however, that was what he told me. Living with insane, narcissist mother for couple of years from preschool to 3rd grade. Even if she was a high school dropout with known alcoholism and mental problems. She won the custody and I was forced to move from my dad's home in a big city with my own room to a crappy apartment with no privacy, in shitty small city in the middle of nowhere. We didn't even have a shower in the apartment, just a shared one in the basement. Nor did I have a room, just a bed in the corner with no privacy at all. Mental abuse, alcoholism, drinking trips where I was forced to hang out with, or was left home alone without a warning. I was threatened to shut up about the shit or else I would suffer. Later I learned that I had been living with a manipulative narcissist who continued the abuse well until my mid-30s. The fucker is now all alone after I cut contact years ago and has now tried to kill herself 4 times, and I just wish she would finally succeed in even one thing in her life. Those 4 years are something I will not get back. In hindsight, nothing was as shitty as that time in my life, and it's the reason I'm this fucked up. Not even the time when she backed over someone's dog and the dog gave the last scream when his bones crackled under the Toyota. Or when a classmate of mine got beaten to pulp and never came back from the hospital. When I was 13, on Christmas Day, my parents and siblings left my gran's house to head home, only 15 minutes away. A while after we got home, my mom realized she forgot her phone, called it. My gran answered and said she was about to take a shower, get ready for work, so she leave the door unlocked and the phone in the living room. Soon after, my dad and I leave to get the phone. He sends me in to get it. I walked in, picked up the phone, and I didn't hear the shower, so I called out, "Thanks. Love you mum," expecting a reply from her bedroom. Nothing. She should have heard me, but maybe she didn't. I called out the same again. Nothing. I felt like something was wrong. I knocked on her door and called for her. Nothing. A minute later I decided to slowly open the door just to make sure she was alright. Maybe she was in the restroom and ignoring me. I open the door and my gran is laying face down in a puddle of blood on the carpet at least 1.5 feet around. She'd fainted coming out of the shower and her face had hit the edge doorway connecting her bathroom and bedroom. I screamed, turned her over. She was breathing through blood and her eye socket was just a red fleshy blob. I ran out just until my dad could see me, hands and clothes drenched in blood, and ran back inside to her. I helped carry her to the car so we could take her to the ER. My dad had me call my mom, my gran's daughter, while I was in the backseat with my gran laying on her side in my lap. 3 days later, my gran's out of the ICU and my mom and I went to my gran's house to clean everything. I scrubbed out the blood puddle. I still have nightmares about it every Christmas. And this is the first year since then that I don't live with my gran, who now lives with my parents, so I can't repeatedly check on her like I normally do. Tough year.